Having learned about the age of exploration and Christopher Columbus and all of the things that he did, and the encounter between the Old World, Europe, and the New World in the Americas, today we're going to put the pieces together and look at the system of trade and exchange that developed between the continents Europe, Africa, and North and South America, called the Columbian Exchange. We've talked about trade networks before, and we've learned, as always, that trade isn't always just about exchanging goods. Often it's more significant historically for the exchange of ideas and diseases and technologies and religions, because the people who trade are the people who are the conduits between different civilizations, and they, communicate ideas. This is true of the Columbian Exchange. It was incredibly significant for its cultural diffusion. But it was also unprecedented in connecting not only human civilizations, but also completely different ecosystems. And so, extra special trade network lesson today. As a suggestion, because I know if you're in my class, you've learned about the Columbian Exchange in years past. So you can try to take notes college style and just listen for the following 3 things as I go through the slides, and then pause on the very last slide for the key points. You're going to want to capture a good specific description of the Columbian Exchange, and then keep track of its effects on Europe and its effects on the Americas. So starting with a description, the Columbian Exchange was the system of trade that existed between Europe and the Americas following Columbus's voyages, hence the name. And it involves exchanging plants, animals, diseases, human beings as both settlers and slaves, and technologies. The Columbian Exchange also involved a huge amount of wealth coming from the colonies that developed in the Americas to European kingdoms, and that's going to have its own effects, which we'll be studying next. First, let's look at just the effects of the stuff that was exchanged. For Europe got access to a bunch of new crops that only existed in the Americas up to that point, including potatoes, sweet potatoes, cacao beans, so chocolate, vanilla, corn, tomatoes, and other things that you can see on the picture. A lot of these foods are really high in calories, which is actually really good because it means that they can support higher populations. So, as a result of getting access to these foods from the Americas, like the potato, the population in Europe increased quite a bit. You can see on the graph on the bottom, I've circled it in pink, the little uptick that you start to get with the Columbian Exchange, which actually sets the stage for a really high increase in population in Europe during the Industrial Revolution. The high-calorie foods from the New World allowed European populations to go back up, recovering and then some from the Black Death. And that will give Europe the people to settle the New World and build a big workforce, which will become really important when we get to the Industrial Revolution and factories are developed, and you need a big working class for that. In terms of ideas and government, there are more effects for Europe. First, big money from the Americas led to the creation of absolute monarchy, so a kind of king or queen with full unlimited power, the kind of power you need to be able to pay for your own army to preserve. So lots of money from the Americas led to more power for kings in Europe in a form of government called absolute monarchy. Second, big money from the Americas funds the Renaissance, a time period of rebirth of European culture and scholarship. And what this means is there's more culture and art and thinking generally going on in Europe than there had been during the Middle Ages. This paid for cultural and intellectual output of the sort that hadn't been seen since the fall of Rome. In other words, money from the Americas pays for art and culture, and people began to think and invent stuff on a scale that had just not been possible during the Middle Ages under feudalism. So you end up with a culture that is more individualistic, a little bit more skeptical, and that itself is going to have some pretty big effects. So number 3, the Renaissance, so like more thinking generally in art, leads to more skepticism of traditional authority. People start to question what they have been told. And so in the long run, it weakens the monarchy or the kings in France because people start to question authority figures. And we know that the kings and queens in France relied on like a belief in Christianity and divine right for their legitimacy. So while colonization made kings and queens more powerful in the short run because of the money, in the long run, the ideas that come out of the Renaissance would ultimately weaken the monarchy. For the Americas, the story is not so pleasant. First, European diseases killed up to 90% of the native populations. So you thought the violence and the conquest was bad. The disease was actually worse. Not only did it kill the populations, it killed native cultures along with them. Next, the slave trade began, and that led to increased racial diversity in the New World. So this is like one of the first times in history that you have a bunch of different races mixing in a new continent. I like diversity. Diversity is nice. Unfortunately, this diversity came as a result of enslaving massive amounts of people. So, sad story there. And finally, Christianity spread to the New World, but again, by force, by colonizers. So we come to the key points. I forgot the little arrow on the top right. Well, actually, like I put it here, but that's not as cute. So here are the key points. Go ahead and pause the video here and make sure you have all of this in your notes. One thing to keep in mind as a final point about the Colombian exchange is that most of the people that I teach are products of this event. I myself am mostly Mexican, partly European, partly who knows what, and I wouldn't exist in my own form without this event. At the same time, this event involved lots of human beings being massacred and shipped and owned as property, which is a horrible, horrible part of history. So when you're evaluating the Colombian exchange, try to remember all pieces. Like you'll hear, we get pizza as a result, which is nice, but also, enslavement and lots of death.